Millionaire abandons wife for being sick years later. He sees her at the airport. He left her when she needed him most, walking away without a second glance. But years later, in a crowded airport, his world shatters, because there she is, healthy, successful, and holding the hand of a little girl who looks just like him. The man at her side isn't just a stranger. He's the one who stayed, the one who raised his child. Now, he's desperate for answers. But some doors once closed can never be reopened. Will he find redemption, or has he already lost everything that truly mattered? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Charlotte Reed stood at the edge of their rooftop terrace, the Manhattan skyline glittering before her like a promise. The cool evening air carried the faint scent of her perfume back to Vincent as he approached, 2 champagne flutes balanced in his hands. 5 years, he said, offering her a glass. Who would have thought? Charlotte's smile illuminated her face as she took the champagne. I did, from that very first day at the gallery opening. Vincent laughed, the sound warm and genuine. When I spilled wine on your white dress and you told me I owed you dinner. Best ruined dress of my life. Charlotte clinked her glass against his. They had been unstoppable since that night, Charlotte with her brilliant research in immunology, Vincent building his real estate empire floor by floor across the city. Their wedding 3 years ago had been featured in society pages. Their combined success, the stuff of New York legend. Vincent wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. To us, he whispered against her hair. To us, she echoed, but her voice caught slightly. Vincent didn't notice. The first signs were subtle. Charlotte dropping things more often. The persistent fatigue she blamed on long hours at the lab. The strange numbness in her fingertips that came and went. You're working too hard, Vincent insisted one morning as she struggled to button her blouse, her fingers uncooperative. Probably, Charlotte agreed, but the worry in her eyes told a different story. 3 weeks later, when she collapsed during a presentation at the medical conference, Vincent finally understood something was terribly wrong. After a few days, the doctor's office was aggressively neutral. Beige walls, generic landscapes, uncomfortable chairs designed to give the illusion of comfort. Vincent held Charlotte's hand as doctor. Levine reviewed the test results, his voice fading to a distant hum as certain phrases cut through the fog. Rare autoimmune condition, progressive, treatments available, but no cure. Vincent felt the blood drain from his face. The room tilted sideways, then righted itself. He was 13 again, sitting beside another hospital bed, holding another hand that grew weaker by the day. Vincent. Charlotte's voice pulled him back. Her fingers tightened around his. Did you hear what Dr. Levine said about the treatment options? He nodded automatically, though he hadn't heard a word. All he could see was his mother's face, once vibrant and full of life, hollowed out by the same disease that now threatened to take Charlotte. We'll start immunosuppressive therapy next week, Dr. Levine was saying. There have been significant advancements since, well, in recent years. Vincent knew the doctor had almost said, since your mother's time. His family's history with this particular condition was part of Charlotte's medical record. What are the success rates? Vincent asked, his voice sounding foreign to his own ears. As Dr. Levine detailed statistics and treatment protocols, Vincent felt himself withdrawing, building walls brick by brick between himself and the inevitable pain that loomed before them. Charlotte squeezed his hand again. We'll get through this, she whispered. Vincent nodded, but inside, a memory surfaced with brutal clarity. His 13-year-old self, holding his mother's papery hand as machines beeped around them, promising her that everything would be okay when they both knew it was a lie. He had sworn then, in the sterile silence after she was gone, that he would never put himself through that kind of helpless agony again. That night, Charlotte reached for him in bed, her body seeking comfort in his warmth. "I'm scared, Vincent," she admitted, her voice small in the darkness. He should have pulled her close, should have promised her the world, the moon, anything to ease her fear. Instead, he felt his body stiffen, his heart retreating behind the walls he'd constructed long ago. "The doctors know what they're doing," he said, the words hollow even to his own ears. "You should get some rest." Charlotte's hand lingered on his chest for a moment longer, before slowly withdrawing. The space between them in the bed grew vast and cold. "I have that board meeting tomorrow," Vincent said into the silence. "I might sleep in the guest room so I don't wake you when I get up." It was the first lie of many to come. As Vincent gathered his pillow and retreated from their bedroom, Charlotte stared at the ceiling, alone with her diagnosis, and the growing realization that the battle ahead might be one she'd have to fight without the man she loved by her side. Days have passed then. One evening, Vincent stared at the spreadsheet on his computer screen, the numbers blurring together as the office clock ticked past 10 p.m. The corner office that had once felt like a symbol of his success now served as a convenient bunker, a place to hide from the reality waiting at home. His phone buzzed with Charlotte's name on the screen, the third call tonight. He silenced it and turned the device face down. 3 months had passed since the diagnosis, and with each passing week, Vincent had retreated further into his work. Longer hours at the office, weekend trips to inspect properties, anything to avoid the apartment where medication bottles multiplied on the bathroom counter, and the woman he married transformed into someone he barely recognized, someone who reminded him of his mother. The memory came unbidden. Charlotte in a sundress, laughing as they ran through a summer rainstorm in Central Park during their second date. Her hand in his, warm and strong as they ducked under an awning, water dripping from her eyelashes. "I've never met anyone like you," he had told her then, meaning every word. Now he couldn't bear to look at her. Charlotte sat on the edge of their bed, the effort of showering and dressing having depleted what little energy she had. The immunosuppressive treatments left her exhausted and vulnerable to every passing virus. Her once thick hair had thinned, and the simple act of buttoning her blouse had become a frustrating challenge as the numbness in her fingers progressed. She heard the front door open and close. Vincent was home. "In here," she called, her voice stronger than she felt. Vincent appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, eyes immediately darting away from her to focus on the wall behind her head. "You should be resting," he said, the concern in his words undermined by the coldness in his tone. "I waited up to see you," Charlotte said. "We hardly talk anymore." "I've been busy." He moved to the closet, his back to her. "The Murray project is behind schedule." "Vincent," Charlotte's voice broke. "Please look at me." He turned, his expression carefully blank. "I need you," she said simply. "I can't do this alone." Something flickered across his face, pain, guilt, fear, before his features hardened again. "You have doctors for that, the best money can buy." "I don't need doctors right now. I need my husband." Vincent's jaw tightened. "What do you want from me, Charlotte?" "To sit here and watch you suffer? To hold your hand while you get weaker?" The cruelty of his words struck her like a physical blow. Charlotte flinched, tears welling in her eyes. "I want you to be the man I married," she whispered. "The one who promised to stay by my side through sickness and health." Vincent laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "Right, sickness and health. Did you know this was coming when you made me promise that?" Charlotte stared at him in disbelief. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing." He paced the room, running a hand through his hair. "It's just convenient, isn't it? The brilliant researcher gets the exact condition she studies. Now I'm trapped, obligated to play the devoted husband while you manipulate me with your..." Stop. Charlotte's voice was quiet but firm. Listen to yourself, Vincent. You think I wanted this? That I'm exaggerating for attention? He didn't answer, but his silence was confirmation enough. Charlotte slowly stood, steadying herself against the nightstand. My illness isn't about you. It never was. Everything is about me now, isn't it? Vincent snapped. My money for your treatments, my time to take care of you, my life put on hold while yours falls apart. The medication bottles on the nightstand caught his eye, along with the stack of medical bills Charlotte had been reviewing earlier. His face contorted with a mixture of disgust and fear. I never signed up for this, he said, his voice low and final. I can't do it again. I won't. Vincent, please. But he was already moving, grabbing a suitcase from the closet, throwing clothes inside without looking at what he took. Where are you going? Charlotte asked, tears streaming down her face. Anywhere but here. Vincent zipped the suitcase closed with violent finality. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I'm just not strong enough to watch someone I love die again. He walked out without looking back, leaving Charlotte standing alone in their bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of her illness and his abandonment. The next day, Charlotte sat in a treatment room at the hospital, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the day. The door opened, and a man with kind eyes and slightly rumpled dark hair entered, carrying her chart. Mrs. Reed, I'm Dr. Gabriel Martinez. I'll be overseeing your treatment plan going forward. He pulled up a chair to sit at her eye level rather than standing over her. How are you feeling today? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, broke something open inside Charlotte. She hadn't realized how long it had been since someone had looked at her, really looked at her, with compassion rather than fear or pity. Not great, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Dr. Martinez nodded, his expression understanding without being condescending. That's completely understandable. Let's talk about what we can do to make things a little better, one step at a time. The weeks after Vincent's departure blurred together in Charlotte's mind. She woke each morning with a moment of foggy confusion before reality crashed back. She was alone, sick, and abandoned. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary now echoed with emptiness. The king-sized bed a cold expanse of cotton sheets where his warmth should have been. Charlotte sat at the dining room table, calculator in hand, staring at the growing stack of medical bills. Her fingers trembled as she punched in numbers, each total more devastating than the last. Vincent's health insurance still covered her, but the co-pays and experimental treatments were draining her savings at an alarming rate. How am I supposed to do this? She whispered to the empty room, pressing her palms against her eyes to stem the tears that seemed perpetually ready to fall. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, treatment appointment in 2 hours. Charlotte gathered her strength, both physical and emotional, and prepared to face another day of needles, tests, and pitying glances from nurses who had begun to notice she always came alone. At the hospital, Charlotte sat in the treatment chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the room. The nausea had started earlier than usual today, her body rebelling against the medications meant to help her. Mrs. Reed? Dr. Martinez appeared at her side, concern etching his features. You're looking particularly pale today. Charlotte attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Just a bad morning. Gabriel checked her chart, his brow furrowing. Your weight's down again. He sat in the chair beside her, his voice lowering. Charlotte, are you eating properly at home? The gentle inquiry broke through her carefully constructed facade. I try, she admitted. But cooking is exhausting, and everything tastes like metal since the last round of medications. The next day, Gabriel appeared in her treatment room carrying a thermos. Hospital food is terrible at the best of times, he said, unscrewing the cap. The rich aroma of homemade chicken soup filled the small space. My grandmother's recipe. It helped me through med school when nothing else would stay down. Charlotte's eyes welled with tears at the simple kindness. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply, pouring the soup into a cup and placing it in her hands. Over the following weeks, Gabriel became a steady presence in Charlotte's life. He secured her priority status for a promising experimental treatment, explaining the paperwork with patience when her foggy brain struggled to comprehend the medical jargon. When hospital bureaucracy threatened to delay her treatments, he navigated the system with quiet determination on her behalf. 3 months after Vincent's departure, Charlotte sat in Gabriel's office, clutching the results of her latest blood tests. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely audible. "How can I be pregnant? With everything my body's going through." Gabriel leaned forward, his expression gentle. "It's rare but not impossible. Your medications haven't affected fertility as much as we initially thought." Charlotte's hands moved protectively to her still flat stomach, then back to the test results. "What does this mean for the treatments? For the baby?" Her voice broke. I don't know how to do this alone." The tears came then, months of held-back grief pouring out in gasping sobs. Gabriel moved his chair beside hers, offering a box of tissues and the steady presence she'd been denied since Vincent walked out. "You're not alone," he said firmly. "We'll adjust your treatment plan. There are protocols for pregnant patients with your condition. It won't be easy, but we'll navigate this together." Charlotte looked up at him through tear-blurred vision. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Gabriel's expression softened. "Because everyone deserves someone in their corner, especially when facing what you're facing." Across the city, Vincent Reed stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his expanded office, overlooking the construction site of his newest development. The project had doubled in scope since he'd thrown himself into work 3 months ago, channeling every emotion into concrete and steel. His assistant knocked timidly. "Mr. Reed, James Henderson is calling again. He says it's about Charlotte." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Tell him I'm in a meeting." "He's called 5 times this week. He says it's important." "I said I'm in a meeting." Vincent turned back to the window, his reflection hard and unfamiliar. "And clear my schedule for the weekend. I'm flying to Chicago to meet with investors." After his assistant left, Vincent picked up a rendering of the new building, focusing on the details that needed revision. Work was clean. Work made sense. Work didn't remind him of the look in Charlotte's eyes when he walked out the door. 6 years passed like pages turning in 2 different books. One cold and pristine, the other dog-eared and well-loved. Vincent Reed's empire grew exponentially. He added 3 international offices, acquired 7 struggling competitors during the economic downturn, and graced the cover of Business Insider as the Ice King of real estate. His Manhattan penthouse remained immaculate, cleaned daily by staff he rarely spoke to. At night, he would stand on his terrace overlooking the city, a glass of 18-year-old scotch in hand, surrounded by everything and nothing at all. Across the ocean, Charlotte's life unfolded in a kaleidoscope of small, precious moments. Dr. Gabriel Martinez ensured she received the most promising experimental treatments for her condition. He maintained professional boundaries at first, scheduling her appointments at the end of his day so they could talk without rushing, bringing research papers he thought might interest her. As her health gradually improved, their conversations extended beyond her medical care to books they both loved, memories of their childhoods, and dreams they still harbored. "The new treatment is showing remarkable results," Gabriel told her during her 2nd year of therapy. "Your inflammatory markers are half what they were 6 months ago." Charlotte, her color returning after months of pallor, smiled. "I actually walked up 3 flights of stairs yesterday without stopping." Gabriel's eyes lit up. "That's fantastic progress." The pregnancy had been difficult, with Charlotte confined to bed rest for the final 2 months. Gabriel adjusted her treatments, consulted with specialists across Europe, and spent his lunch breaks bringing her medical journals and fresh pastries from the bakery near the hospital. When labor came, a month early and frighteningly intense. Gabriel was there, having arranged his schedule to be available. He held Charlotte's hand through 18 hours of labor, wiping her forehead with cool cloths and encouraging her when she thought she couldn't continue. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as she pushed through another contraction. "You can do this." When Lucia finally arrived, small but healthy with a shock of dark hair, Gabriel placed the tiny bundle in Charlotte's arms with such tenderness that the attending nurse exchanged knowing glances with her colleague. As Lucia grew from a fragile infant to a curious toddler, Gabriel was there for every milestone. He sat on Charlotte's couch, medical journals forgotten on the coffee table, as Lucia took her first wobbly steps toward him. His deep laugh filled Charlotte's apartment when Lucia's first word was a perfectly pronounced stethoscope, after months of playing with his medical equipment during his visits. Charlotte watched him reading bedtime stories to Lucia. The little girl curled trustingly against his side and felt something bloom in her chest that she'd thought had withered forever. By Lucia's 5th birthday, Charlotte had completed her PhD in immunology, turning her personal experience into professional expertise. She joined Gabriel's research team at the hospital, her insights proving invaluable to their work on autoimmune diseases. Her illness, while not cured, had stabilized into manageable flares that no longer dominated her life. On a crisp spring afternoon in their 6th year together, Gabriel suggested a picnic in the small park near their apartment in Paris's 7th arrondissement. Charlotte packed sandwiches while Lucia, now 5 and fiercely independent, insisted on carrying the basket of strawberries herself. They spread a blanket beneath a flowering chestnut tree. Lucia ran to join a group of children playing with a puppy nearby, her dark curls bouncing in the sunshine. Gabriel watched her go, then turned to Charlotte. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the perfect moment," he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Then I realized, every moment with you and Lucia is already perfect." He opened the box, revealing a simple sapphire ring. "I don't want to replace what you lost, Charlotte. I want to build something new with you. Something that's ours." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears as he continued. "I love you. I love Lucia as if she were my own. Will you marry me?" Charlotte looked from Gabriel to Lucia, playing happily in the dappled sunlight, and back to the man who had never once walked away when things became difficult. "Yes," she whispered, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I will." Meanwhile, Vincent Reed stepped out of his private jet at Charles de Gaulle Airport, straightening his custom-tailored Italian suit. The early morning Parisian air felt crisp against his face, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled cabin he'd just left. His assistant, Margot, fell into step beside him, already rattling off his schedule. "The meeting with Desmarais Development is at 11. They're eager to partner on the Seine Riverfront project, but their asking price is 15% above our threshold." Margot's voice was efficient, matching Vincent's stride as they entered the terminal. Vincent barely nodded. "They'll come down. They always do." His reputation preceded him across continents. Vincent Reed, the deal closer, the man who never flinched during negotiations, the man whose emotional detachment was his greatest asset. "Your driver is waiting, and I've arranged for the dossiers to be delivered to your suite at Le Bristol," Margot continued, her fingers flying across her tablet. "Also, Mr. Nakamura called again about the Tokyo property. Tell him my offer stands until Friday, not a day longer." Vincent's voice carried the finality that had become his trademark. His security detail cleared a path through the crowded terminal. Vincent checked his watch, a rare vintage Patek Philippe that had cost more than some people's homes. He had precisely 43 minutes to reach his hotel, review the files, and prepare for the meeting that would add another billion-dollar development to his portfolio. Just another day, just another deal. Then he heard it, a laugh. Clear and musical, cutting through the airport's dull roar like a beam of light through fog. Vincent froze mid-step, causing his security guard to nearly collide with him. "Sir?" the guard questioned, but Vincent wasn't listening. His eyes scanned the terminal, searching for the source of that sound, a sound his body remembered before his mind could place it. And then he saw her. Charlotte stood near a coffee kiosk, her head tilted back in laughter at something someone had said. Her chestnut hair fell in loose waves past her shoulders, catching the sunlight streaming through the terminal's glass ceiling. Her cheeks were flushed with healthy color, her body no longer the fragile shell he'd last seen. Vincent's breath caught in his throat. She was vibrant, alive, transformed from the pale, trembling woman he'd walked away from. As if sensing his gaze, Charlotte turned. Their eyes locked across the crowded terminal, 50 feet of physical distance that somehow felt both infinite and non-existent. Recognition flashed across her face, followed by something unreadable. For one suspended moment, they stared at each other, the busy airport fading to background noise around them. Then a man stepped into view, tall with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He placed a protective arm around Charlotte's shoulders, leaning down to say something in her ear. Vincent recognized him immediately from the hospital, Dr. Martinez, the doctor who had been there when Vincent hadn't. A small figure darted between travelers, rushing back to Charlotte's side. A little girl, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, with Charlotte's delicate features and expressive eyes. She tugged at Charlotte's hand, saying something that made Charlotte break her gaze away from Vincent to look down at her daughter. Vincent's mind raced with calculations he couldn't stop himself from making. 6 years, the child's age, the timing of his departure. The family turned away, moving toward the exit. Charlotte didn't look back, but the doctor glanced over his shoulder, his arm tightening slightly around Charlotte as they disappeared into the crowd. "Mr. Reed, we're going to be late." Margot's voice penetrated the fog in his mind. Vincent stood motionless, his carefully constructed world tilting on its axis. What? Yes, the meeting. He moved mechanically toward the exit, his thoughts 1,000 miles from the billion-dollar deal awaiting him. The image of Charlotte, healthy, laughing, with her new family, burned in his mind. "Are you all right, sir?" Margot asked, concern creeping into her professional tone. "Fine," Vincent answered automatically, though nothing was fine. Nothing had been fine for years, but he'd become expert at not acknowledging that fact. The sleek black Mercedes waited outside. Vincent slid into the back seat, his mind still in the terminal with the family walking away from him. The family that should have been his. "To Le Bristol," his driver announced. Vincent nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Vincent canceled his meetings for the remainder of the week, citing a sudden health concern that his staff knew better than to question. The suite at Le Bristol became his command center, room service trays piling up as he orchestrated his investigation. "I need everything on Charlotte Reed, now Martinez, and her husband, Dr. Gabriel Martinez. Their work, their home, everything." Vincent instructed his most discreet private investigator over the phone, his voice tight with control. Within 24 hours, digital files flooded his secure server. Vincent's hands trembled slightly as he opened the first document. Dr. Charlotte Martinez, Ph.D., M.D., leading researcher at Institut Pasteur, specialized in autoimmune disorders, particularly the rare condition that had once threatened her life. Multiple published papers, awards for breakthrough treatment protocols. She had transformed her suffering into purpose. Next came information on Dr. Gabriel Martinez, respected immunologist, chief of research, met Charlotte during her treatment, married for 5 years. Their professional collaboration had resulted in treatments that were saving lives across Europe. Vincent stared at their wedding photo, Charlotte in a simple ivory dress, her face glowing with health and happiness as she looked up at Gabriel. The man gazed back at her with such naked adoration that Vincent had to look away. Then came the file he'd been both dreading and desperate to see. Lucia Martinez. Born March 17th, just 7 months after Vincent had walked out of their bedroom, leaving Charlotte surrounded by medication bottles and unpaid medical bills. The timing was undeniable. Lucia was his daughter. Vincent enlarged a photo of the little girl. She had Charlotte's smile, but those eyes, those were unmistakably his mother's eyes, the same ones that stared back at him from his own mirror every morning. "My daughter," he whispered to the empty suite. The words felt foreign on his tongue. For 3 days, Vincent barely ate or slept. He paced his suite like a caged animal, alternating between ice-cold rage at Gabriel for raising his child and crushing shame at his own cowardice. The emotions were so unfamiliar after years of careful detachment that they left him physically ill. On the 4th day, he showered, dressed in his most imposing suit, and ordered his driver to take him to Institut Pasteur. The research facility was modern and bright, nothing like the sterile hospital where he'd last seen Charlotte. Vincent approached the reception desk, summoning the authority that had built his empire. "I need to see Dr. Charlotte Martinez, immediately." The receptionist looked up, clearly intimidated by his presence. "Do you have an appointment, monsieur?" "Tell her Vincent Reed is here." 5 minutes later, Vincent was escorted through security doors into a laboratory where researchers in white coats moved between workstations with practiced efficiency. And there she was, Charlotte, her hair pulled back, focused intently on a microscope. A colleague touched her shoulder, gesturing toward the door. Charlotte looked up, and the color drained from her face when she saw him. She said something to her colleague, removed her lab coat, and walked toward Vincent with measured steps. Her professional composure was perfect, but he could see the slight tremor in her hands. "Vincent," she said, her voice cool and controlled. "This is unexpected. We need to talk, Charlotte. This is my workplace." Her eyes darted to curious colleagues watching them. "I have responsibilities." "I know about Lucia," Vincent said, his voice lower. "I know she's mine." Charlotte's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing a flash of anger before she regained control. "Follow me," she said, leading him to a small conference room and closing the door. "You had no right to investigate my family. Our daughter, Charlotte. You didn't tell me." "Tell you?" Charlotte's composure cracked. "You walked out on me when I was dying, Vincent. You left me alone with nothing but debt and disease. When exactly should I have told you? When you changed your phone number? When you had your lawyer deliver divorce papers to my hospital bed?" Vincent flinched at the raw pain in her voice. "I didn't know you were pregnant." "Would it have made a difference?" Charlotte challenged, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. Vincent opened his mouth, then closed it. They both knew the answer. "Why are you here now?" Charlotte asked, crossing her arms protectively. "What do you want after all this time?" The question hung between them, forcing them both to confront the wreckage of their past and the uncertain terrain of their future. Few days later, Vincent stood by the window of the cafe, watching raindrops trace jagged paths down the glass. The small table he'd secured in the corner offered privacy, but did nothing to calm his racing heart. When the door opened and Charlotte stepped inside, shaking droplets from her umbrella, he felt a tightness in his chest that had nothing to do with the expensive suit he wore like armor. She spotted him immediately, her expression carefully neutral as she approached. Gone was the gaunt, desperate woman he'd abandoned years ago. This Charlotte moved with quiet confidence, her health visibly restored. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Vincent said as she took the seat across from him. "I'd rather have this conversation away from my colleagues," Charlotte replied, declining his offer to take her coat. "What exactly do you want, Vincent?" The waiter appeared and Charlotte ordered a simple espresso. Vincent hadn't touched his own coffee. "I want to understand what happened after I left," he said once they were alone again. "And I want to know my daughter." Charlotte's laugh held no humor. "You want to understand what happened? I was pregnant. desperately ill and completely alone. The medical bills you left behind nearly bankrupted me. I had to sell everything just to make the minimum payments." Vincent winced. "I didn't know—" "You didn't want to know," Charlotte cut him off. "That was your choice." She wrapped her hands around the tiny espresso cup when it arrived, as if drawing strength from its warmth. "Gabriel was my doctor first," she continued after a moment. "When I couldn't keep hospital food down, he brought homemade soup. When I couldn't afford specialized treatments, he found research programs. He sat with me through every chemotherapy session, holding a basin when I was sick, reading medical journals aloud when I was too weak to hold a book." Vincent stared at his untouched coffee, shame burning through him. "When I told him I was pregnant, he was the only one who didn't suggest termination. He believed we could save both of us." Her voice softened slightly. "He was right." "When did you—" Vincent couldn't finish the question. "Fall in love with him?" Charlotte supplied. "Not until much later, after Lucia was born. He was just my doctor, then my friend. He'd come check on us, bring groceries when I was too exhausted to shop. He taught me how to manage my condition while caring for an infant." She pulled out her phone, scrolled briefly, and placed it on the table between them. The screen showed Gabriel on his knees in a park, steadying a bicycle, while a laughing Lucia, maybe 4 years old, pedaled unsteadily. "He taught her to ride a bike," Charlotte said. "He reads her bedtime stories every night, checks under her bed for monsters, kisses every scrape. He's never missed a school performance or a doctor's appointment." Vincent stared at the image, his throat tight. "I'd like to know her," he said finally. "I have rights." "No," Charlotte said firmly, taking back her phone. "You don't. Gabriel legally adopted Lucia 3 years ago. We explained to her that she grew in my belly when I was married to someone else, but Gabriel is her father in every way that matters." "She's my blood," Vincent insisted, desperation edging into his voice. "You left us both when we needed you most," Charlotte said, her eyes never leaving his. "Gabriel chose us when we were at our worst. That's the difference." The finality in her voice struck him like a physical blow. "I made a terrible mistake," Vincent admitted. "I was a coward." "Yes," Charlotte agreed simply. "You were." She finished her espresso and gathered her purse. "I need to get home to my family." "Charlotte," Vincent called as she stood. "Are you happy, truly?" For the first time, her expression softened. Completely. Later that evening, Vincent stood across the street from their apartment building. Through the warmly lit windows, he could see them, Charlotte setting plates on a dining table, Gabriel helping Lucia with what appeared to be homework. The little girl said something that made both adults laugh, Gabriel ruffling her hair affectionately. Vincent watched as they gathered around the table, heads bowing briefly before they began to eat. They passed dishes, talked animatedly, existed in the easy intimacy of a family that had weathered storms together. These were the moments his fear had cost him. The bedtime stories unread, the bicycle lessons ungiven, the scraped knees unkissed. The quiet heroism of showing up, day after day, that Gabriel had demonstrated while Vincent had run away. As rain began to fall again, Vincent turned and walked away from the family he could have had. One crisp afternoon, Vincent stared at the elegantly wrapped package on his hotel room desk. The pink bicycle helmet gleamed beneath tissue paper, adorned with glittering stars and a personalized nameplate, Lucia. His third gift in 2 weeks. The first two, a delicate silver bracelet and a collector's edition of children's classics, had been returned unopened, but Vincent remained undeterred. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, confirming the substantial donation he'd made to Charlotte's research foundation. The attached note specified it was, "For advancing doctor." Charlotte Martinez's groundbreaking autoimmune research with a separate trust established for Lucia Reed's educational future. Vincent knew using Lucia's biological surname was provocative, but something desperate drove him forward. He couldn't simply walk away again. The following afternoon, Charlotte called. "You need to stop this," she said without preamble, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The gifts, the donations with strings attached, all of it." "I'm trying to take responsibility," Vincent replied. "I want to support Lucia's future." "Her name is Lucia Martinez," Charlotte said firmly, "and she already has everything she needs. I have rights." "You surrendered those rights when you walked out on a pregnant woman," Charlotte interrupted. "Gabriel would like to speak with you. Tomorrow, noon, at the cafe near our lab." She hung up before he could respond. The next day, Vincent arrived early, ordering an espresso he wouldn't drink. When Gabriel entered, Vincent was struck by the quiet confidence in the other man's demeanor. Gabriel wore simple clothes, well-worn jeans, a button-down shirt with rolled sleeves, but carried himself with the assurance of a man who knew exactly who he was and where he belonged. "Thank you for meeting me," Gabriel said, sliding into the chair across from Vincent. "I didn't realize I had a choice," Vincent replied. Gabriel studied him thoughtfully. "We always have choices. That's actually why I wanted to talk to you." "About Lucia." "About what you're doing to Charlotte," Gabriel corrected. "These gifts, the trust fund, the donation with Lucia's name incorrectly listed, they're not gestures of support. They're disruptions to the life we've built." Vincent leaned forward. "She's my daughter." "Biologically, yes," Gabriel acknowledged. "But being a father is about much more than DNA." Gabriel pulled out his phone and scrolled briefly before setting it on the table. The screen displayed a photo of him sitting beside a hospital bed where Charlotte lay, gaunt and pale, connected to multiple IV lines. "This was during her third round of chemotherapy," Gabriel explained. "I slept in that chair for 17 nights straight." He swiped to another image. Gabriel and Charlotte in what appeared to be a home kitchen, surrounded by medication bottles as he demonstrated how to prepare an injection. "I learned to administer every medication she needed," Gabriel continued, his voice steady. "I celebrated when her white cell count improved even marginally. I held her hair back when she was sick and washed her when she was too weak to stand." Vincent swallowed hard, unable to look away from the evidence of his own absence. "When Lucia was born," Gabriel continued, "Charlotte was still fragile. I learned to change diapers while monitoring Charlotte's vitals. I fed Lucia bottles while Charlotte slept, fighting to regain her strength." Gabriel put his phone away, meeting Vincent's gaze directly. "You had your chance to show what love means when it's difficult. I didn't choose Charlotte despite her illness. I loved her through it, because that's what love is." The simple truth of Gabriel's words struck Vincent with devastating clarity. He had run from difficulty. Gabriel had embraced it. "I just want to make things right," Vincent said quietly. "The right thing now is respecting the family we've built," Gabriel replied, not unkindly. "Charlotte doesn't need your money for her research. She's earned her grants through brilliant work. Lucia doesn't need a trust fund. She has parents who are providing for her future." Vincent stared at his untouched coffee. "What am I supposed to do?" "Accept that your choices had consequences," Gabriel said, "and understand that true love isn't about grand gestures when it's convenient. It's about showing up every day, especially when it's hard." As Gabriel spoke these words, Vincent finally understood the profound bond between Charlotte and Gabriel. Not just romance, but a partnership forged through fire, tempered by suffering, and strengthened by unwavering commitment. Vincent booked his return flight to New York for the following week. After his conversation with Gabriel, the reality of his situation had finally sunk in. His presence was causing more harm than good, reopening wounds that had long since scarred over. He packed methodically in his hotel room, folding designer shirts with the same precision he applied to business deals. His phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar Parisian number. "Mr. Reed, this is Hôpital St. Louis. I'm calling on behalf of Dr. Charlotte Martinez. There's been an emergency involving her daughter, Lucia." Vincent's heart stuttered. "What happened?" "I'm not authorized to share details, but Dr. Martinez asked me to contact you. She said you might be able to help." 20 minutes later, Vincent rushed through hospital doors, following signs to pediatric intensive care. He found Charlotte pacing outside a treatment room, her face ashen. Gabriel stood nearby, speaking rapidly with another doctor, medical terminology flying between them. "Charlotte," Vincent called softly. "What's happening?" She turned, eyes red-rimmed but dry. "Lucia collapsed at school with a high fever. She's showing symptoms similar to mine." Her voice cracked slightly. Joint pain, rash, respiratory distress. Vincent felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Is it the same condition?" "We don't know yet. Gabriel's reviewing her blood work now." Charlotte glanced toward her husband, who was studying charts with intense concentration. "Autoimmune conditions can have genetic components." The unspoken accusation hung between them, that Vincent's genes might have contributed to Lucia's illness, but Charlotte was too focused on her daughter to dwell on blame. Gabriel approached, his professional demeanor barely containing his parental concern. "Her white count is elevated. Inflammatory markers are through the roof. We need to start treatment immediately. But first," he hesitated, looking at Vincent. "We need blood. Lucia has a rare type, B negative." Vincent straightened. "That's my blood type." Charlotte's eyes widened. "You're B negative?" "Yes, it's on my medical ID." Vincent pulled out his wallet, showing the card he'd carried for years. Gabriel and Charlotte exchanged a look loaded with unspoken communication. "The blood bank is low on B negative," Gabriel explained. "We've put out calls to donors, but it will take time we may not have." "Take mine," Vincent said immediately. "Take whatever she needs." Charlotte pressed her lips together, clearly torn between necessity and reluctance to allow Vincent further into their lives. Gabriel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Charlotte," he murmured, "for Lucia." She nodded once, decisively. "I'll get the paperwork started." Within an hour, Vincent lay on a donation bed, watching his blood flow through tubes. Through the glass partition, he could see into Lucia's room where Gabriel sat beside the small figure on the bed. Even from this distance, Vincent could see the tender precision in Gabriel's movements as he adjusted Lucia's oxygen mask and checked the monitors. Charlotte entered Vincent's room as the nurse finished labeling his donation. "They're processing it now," she said. "Thank you." Vincent nodded. "Will she be okay?" "We hope so. We caught it early." Charlotte's professional tone couldn't quite mask her maternal fear. Gabriel recognized the symptoms immediately. "You work well together," Vincent observed. "We've had practice." Charlotte's gaze drifted to her husband and daughter. "He knows exactly what to do for both of us." Through the glass, Vincent watched as Lucia stirred restlessly. Gabriel immediately leaned closer, whispering something that made the girl smile despite her obvious discomfort. He then reached for a small stuffed rabbit on the bedside table, placing it exactly where Lucia could hold it without disturbing her IV. "He knows her rabbit helps her sleep," Charlotte explained, following Vincent's gaze. "He knows which side she prefers her water cup on. He knows to check under the bed for monsters, but not to make a big deal about it." The intimacy of these details struck Vincent with physical force. These weren't things one could learn in a few visits or through child support payments. This was knowledge earned through thousands of ordinary moments, bedtimes and fevers, nightmares and skinned knees. When Lucia's transfusion began, Vincent watched from outside the room as Gabriel held her hand, explaining each step of the procedure in terms a child could understand, expertly balancing honesty with reassurance. Charlotte stood on Lucia's other side, her hand resting on her daughter's head. The three of them connected in a circle of touch and trust that Vincent could only observe, never enter. 3 days after the transfusion, Lucia's fever broke. The rash began to fade, and her breathing steadied. The doctors confirmed it wasn't the same autoimmune condition that had nearly claimed Charlotte's life, but rather an acute inflammatory response that had responded well to treatment, and Vincent's blood. Vincent found himself lingering in the hospital corridors, unsure of his place, yet unable to leave. He'd taken a room at a nearby hotel, postponing his return flight indefinitely. Each day, he'd arrive with carefully chosen gifts, books, a soft blanket in Lucia's favorite color, educational games that Charlotte would approve of. On the 5th day, he encountered Gabriel in the hallway outside Lucia's room. "Her latest labs look good," Gabriel said, his professional tone softening. "The inflammation markers are down significantly." Vincent nodded. That's wonderful news." An awkward silence stretched between them until Gabriel spoke again. "You know, when she's recovered fully, perhaps you could spend some time with her, if that's what Lucia wants." He adjusted his glasses. Children benefit from knowing where they come from. Vincent stared at him, stunned by the generosity of the offer. "You'd allow that?" "It's not about what I allow," Gabriel replied. "It's about what's best for Lucia. She's curious about you." He paused. "Charlotte and I have never lied to her about her biological father." Before Vincent could respond, Charlotte emerged from Lucia's room. "She's asking for you," she said to Gabriel, then noticed Vincent. "Both of you, actually." Inside, Lucia sat propped against pillows, her complexion still pale but her eyes bright. She beamed at Gabriel. "Papa, the nurse said I can have ice cream today." "That's excellent news, ma petite," Gabriel replied, kissing her forehead. Lucia's gaze shifted to Vincent, curiosity evident in her expression. "Mama says your blood helped make me better." Vincent moved closer to the bed. "I was happy to help." Charlotte touched Gabriel's arm. "We should check with the doctor about that ice cream." Her eyes met Vincent's. "We'll give you a few minutes." After they left, Vincent carefully sat in the chair beside Lucia's bed. She studied him with unnerving directness. "Mama says you're my first father," she said matter-of-factly. "From before I was born." Vincent swallowed hard. "Yes, that's right. Why didn't you stay with us?" The question, asked with a child's innocent bluntness, struck Vincent like a physical blow. I was afraid," he admitted, the truth simpler when spoken to a child. "Of what?" Lucia tilted her head. "Of your mother being sick. I was afraid of loving people who might leave me." Lucia considered this. "But you left us instead." Vincent felt tears prick his eyes. "Yes, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. Papa says mistakes help us learn." Lucia reached for her stuffed rabbit. "Did you learn?" "I'm still learning," Vincent whispered. "Every day." Lucia nodded, satisfied with his answer in a way no adult would be. "I'm glad your blood made me better. Papa says we're connected that way." She carefully sounded out the word. "Your papa is a very wise man," Vincent said, the truth of it settling in his chest like a stone. Meanwhile, in the hospital cafe, Charlotte and Gabriel sat across from each other, their hands intertwined on the table. "Are you sure about this?" Charlotte asked, allowing Vincent to have contact with Lucia. Gabriel's thumb traced circles on her palm. "He's part of her biological history, and he proved himself when she needed him." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "When I saw her collapse at school, all I could think was—" "I know," Gabriel said, bringing her hand to his lips. "I know exactly what you thought." And he did. He'd been there through every moment of Charlotte's illness, had witnessed her fears firsthand. Their shared experience had forged a connection that Vincent could never understand. "You and Lucia are my life," Gabriel murmured. "Nothing will change that." Charlotte leaned across the table, resting her forehead against his. "You chose us when we were at our worst. And I would choose you again," he whispered. "Every day." In that quiet moment of connection, they reaffirmed what Vincent was finally beginning to understand, that love wasn't about grand gestures or convenient timing, but about showing up day after day, especially when it was hardest to do so. One evening, Vincent sat alone in his hotel suite, staring at the blank stationery before him. Outside, Paris glittered beneath a lavender twilight, oblivious to his internal struggle. After days of soul-searching, he'd reached a decision that felt simultaneously devastating and right. He began to write, his pen moving hesitantly at first, then with growing certainty. "Dear Charlotte, there are apologies too profound for words, and mine to you falls into that category. Nothing I can say will undo the pain I caused when I abandoned you at your most vulnerable moment. I've spent years building walls around that truth, convincing myself I had no choice, that I was protecting myself from inevitable heartbreak. I was wrong. Seeing you with Gabriel and Lucia has shown me what true love looks like. Not the convenient emotion I thought I understood, but the unwavering commitment that persists through the darkest moments. Gabriel is Lucia's father in every way that matters. The title belongs to the man who held her hand through fevers, celebrated her victories, and taught her what it means to be loved unconditionally." Vincent paused, wiping unexpected moisture from his eyes before continuing. "I am establishing a foundation dedicated to researching and treating the condition that nearly took you from this world. It will remain anonymous. This isn't about recognition or absolution. It's simply the right thing to do. Perhaps it will help others find the strength I lacked when facing adversity. I leave tomorrow, knowing you've built a beautiful life with a man worthy of your extraordinary heart. My greatest comfort is knowing that my greatest mistake led you to genuine happiness. I wish you, Gabriel, and Lucia every joy. Vincent." The next morning, Vincent arranged for the letter's delivery and met with his attorneys to finalize the foundation structure. He committed $20 million as initial funding, with provisions to contribute annually from his company's profits. "And you want no public acknowledgement of your involvement?" his lawyer clarified, reviewing the documents. "None," Vincent confirmed. "The foundation's work matters, not who funds it." Later, as his driver navigated toward Charles de Gaulle Airport, Vincent found himself requesting a detour. "There's somewhere I need to go first," he said quietly. The car stopped across from the hospital where Lucia had been treated. From this distance, Vincent could see Charlotte and Gabriel walking out the main entrance, Lucia between them holding both their hands. They swung her playfully as she laughed. Her health visibly improved. Vincent watched as Gabriel scooped Lucia into his arms, her small hands clasping around his neck with complete trust. Charlotte leaned against Gabriel's shoulder, exhaustion and relief evident in her posture. Gabriel kissed her temple, a simple gesture containing years of shared struggle and triumph. For the first time, Vincent allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd lost without immediately burying it beneath anger or ambition. The pain was excruciating but cleansing, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. "I'm ready now," he told the driver, turning away from the family he might have had. At the airport, Vincent moved through security with mechanical efficiency, his mind elsewhere. In his briefcase sat the foundation's preliminary paperwork, the Charlotte Initiative, though her name would never appear publicly. He paused at a store display, a collection of children's books catching his eye. After a moment's hesitation, he purchased a colorful volume about a brave little girl who helped others. He addressed it simply to Lucia, with no signature, and arranged for its delivery. It was a small gesture, one that acknowledged he had no place in her life while honoring the connection they would always share. As he boarded his plane, Vincent realized he was experiencing an unfamiliar emotion, not happiness exactly, but a sense of rightness. For perhaps the first time in his life, he had made a decision based not on fear or self-protection, but on what was truly best for those he had once claimed to love. The foundation would be his legacy, his atonement. And though Charlotte would never know its origin, somehow that seemed fitting. True love, Vincent had finally learned, expected nothing in return. 3 years later, Vincent found himself once again navigating the polished corridors of Charles de Gaulle Airport. His company had expanded into European markets, necessitating quarterly visits to Paris. He'd established a routine: efficient meetings, solitary meals at upscale restaurants, and prompt departures. He never ventured near the research hospital where Charlotte worked, or the neighborhood where she lived with Gabrielle and Lucia. Today, however, a delayed flight had disrupted his carefully maintained schedule. Vincent checked his watch, frowning at the 2-hour delay announcement. He located a quiet cafe and ordered an espresso, his attention focused on the financial report open on his tablet. "Vincent?" The voice sliced through his concentration. He looked up, his heart stuttering in his chest. Charlotte stood before him, more radiant than he remembered. Her hair was shorter now, framing her face in soft waves, and her complexion glowed with health. She wore a simple blue dress under a light cardigan, a professional-looking badge clipped to the pocket. "Charlotte," he managed, rising awkwardly. "This is unexpected." A faint smile touched her lips. Same spot, almost exactly. Different circumstances. Vincent nodded, remembering their first airport encounter 3 years prior. "Are you traveling?" "Medical conference in London. My flight's delayed too." She hesitated. "May I join you?" "Just for a moment." Vincent gestured to the empty chair across from him, closing his tablet. They sat in charged silence until the server delivered Vincent's espresso. "I know about the foundation," Charlotte said finally, her voice quiet but certain. Vincent's cup paused halfway to his lips. "I don't understand." "The Charlotte Initiative." Her eyes held his steadily. "Your lawyers are excellent, but I'm rather persistent when something catches my attention. The funding appeared exactly when you left Paris 3 years ago." Vincent set his cup down carefully. "It was meant to be anonymous, and it remains so publicly. But I wanted to thank you personally." Charlotte's expression softened. "The research we've been able to conduct. We've developed treatments that are helping people who had no options before, children who might have grown up without mothers." Vincent swallowed hard. "How did you figure it out?" "The initial funding amount, $20 million. It matched exactly what you once told me was your first major real estate profit. You said you'd never spend it because it represented everything you'd worked for." Her smile turned wistful. "Some details stick with you, even after everything else fades." Vincent looked down at his hands. It seemed appropriate. A comfortable silence settled between them, different from the tense quiet of their previous encounters. "How is Lucia?" Vincent asked finally. Charlotte's face brightened immediately. "She's wonderful. Healthy, strong-willed, brilliant at mathematics. She's 9 now and taking piano lessons." Pride colored her voice. "She has Gabriel's compassionate nature. She brings home every stray animal she finds." She paused, studying Vincent's face. "But she has your smile. Exactly your smile." Gabriel noticed it first, actually. Vincent absorbed this information, this small connection to the daughter he'd never truly known. "I'm glad she's well, and Gabriel." "Still the most patient man I've ever met," Charlotte said. "He's head of pediatric immunology now." Vincent nodded, genuinely pleased for them. "You have a good life." "We do." Charlotte reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope. "Actually, there's something else. Lucia is giving her first piano recital next week. It's nothing elaborate, just the students performing for family and friends." She extended the envelope toward him. "You'd be welcome to attend." Not as... She hesitated. Not in any complicated capacity. Simply as someone who once helped save her life. Vincent stared at the envelope, stunned. Charlotte, are you sure? Gabriel and I have discussed it. We've told Lucia that you were someone who helped when she was ill. She knows you donated blood that matched hers. Charlotte's expression grew serious. She doesn't need to know more than that right now. Maybe someday when she's older. Vincent accepted the envelope with unsteady fingers. Thank you. This is more than I deserve. It's not about deserving, Charlotte said, rising as her flight was announced. It's about moving forward. The following week, Vincent sat in the back row of a small auditorium filled with proud parents and fidgeting siblings. He spotted Charlotte and Gabriel immediately, seated in the front row. Gabriel had a video camera ready, while Charlotte arranged program notes on her lap. When Lucia took the stage, Vincent felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. She was tall for 9, with Charlotte's delicate features, but unmistakably his eyes and smile. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail as she approached the piano with determination. Her performance of Beethoven's Für Elise wasn't perfect. She hesitated twice and missed several notes, but her concentration never wavered. When she finished, her face broke into a wide smile that Vincent recognized from his own childhood photographs. Gabriel recorded every moment while Charlotte applauded enthusiastically. The love radiating between the three of them was palpable even from Vincent's distant seat. As the recital concluded, Vincent rose to leave, not wanting to intrude further on their family celebration. At the door, he turned back for one last look and found Gabriel's eyes meeting his across the room. The other man gave him a slight, dignified nod, acknowledgement of a complex connection neither had chosen, but both now accepted. Vincent returned the gesture, understanding passing between them. Two men who had loved the same woman and child in profoundly different ways. As he stepped into the Parisian evening, Vincent felt something settle within him. Not happiness exactly, but a peaceful acceptance. He hadn't received the second chance he might once have wanted, but instead something perhaps more valuable, the opportunity to grow beyond his failures and find contentment in the happiness of those he had once hurt. If you enjoyed this story, I've found another special one just for you. Our community can't stop talking about how heartwarming and moving it is. Click on the video in front of you to experience this beautiful story before it's gone.